morning, everyone. I'm just delighted to have an opportunity to talk to an author new to us, Grace D. Lee, actually, who turns out to be a fellow Stanford graduate, although we're like half a century apart or something like that. And her wonderful new book, let me hold it up, which is called Portrait of a Thief. And this is the Poison Pen's first mystery book of the month for March. So we're just slightly ahead of the curve because I believe it formally comes out next week, doesn't it, Grace?
It does, April 5th.
So are you really excited to see it finally a reality?
I am. I'm really excited. I'm also a little nervous. It's, all these dreams come true all at once. And so a little overwhelmed, but in a good way.
Well, I think, you have to, there's a lot of demands on an author today to publish a book that go way beyond actually publishing the book. So I think it's great that you will get to proceed and learn how to do that next week, because that's part of the deal. So let me read a brief quote from one of the many rave reviews, besides my own, of Portrait of a Thief. Lee's debut is a fun heist book focusing on 5 Chinese American college students recruited to steal artwork from Western museums and return them to China. The book looks at issues of diaspora, colonization, and the characters' different relationships with culture and identity. Give it to readers who like the verifiers and skin deep. Now, this is Library Reads, which is a monthly compilation of reviews and nominations by librarians. There's also Indie Next, which I think it's a perfectly terrible name. It used to be called Book Sense, which I liked a lot better. That independent bookstores would nominate novels. And did that come across my desk, or was it Library Reads? Do you remember?
I believe it was Library Reads.
Well, whatever, for a first novel to get any kind of attention from groups like that is really exciting. So Grace, I think it would be wonderful if you tell us how you came to be a published writer, and then we'll talk about what was behind Portrait of a Thief, how you conceived it. So what's your path to publication?
Yes, so an unexpected one. I have always loved to read and write growing up. When I was in elementary school, my parents had a meeting with my school librarian because they were concerned I was reading too much. So it's always been one of my passions. But at the same time, I was kind of on this trajectory to medical school. And so I thought that for my whole life, I would have this unfinished Word document or Word documents on my computer, and it would stay that way. And then in college, I studied biology and creative writing, and I started thinking about writing a novel just to see if I could. And then I ended up writing my first novel. It will never see the light of day, but it proved to myself that I was capable of writing something longer than a couple thousand words. And then I wrote a second novel while studying for my MCAT, which is my medical school admissions exam. And then this was the third novel I ever completed. And I had signed with an agent for my second novel, and we had gone through the whole song and dance of revising and submitting to publishers, and ultimately it wasn't picked up. And so when I finished this novel, I finished it during the pandemic. I wrote it solely for myself. I wanted something that was fun and escapist, and featuring these Asian Americans going to all these glamorous locations and stealing back looted art. And I wasn't sure what would happen to it, if anything. And so it was, I think, a surprise and a delight to have interest in it, and now to be sitting here talking to you 1 week away from the publication of my very first book.
Oh, I can see chills sort of running across you. That is fun. So it's a long path to writing a book, to getting it published. And occasionally authors are lucky in that they happen to publish a book for the moment, or it hits the social issues of the moment, the zeitgeist, whatever you want to call it. And certainly Grace's novel, while it's fun and not intended to be any kind of an agenda book, really does do that because, you know, we're going through a period where Asian American culture and assimilation is a major problem. Museums have been discussing, and there are all kinds of negotiations going on about returning art. Colonialism, you know, do Egyptian remains belong in the Met in New York? Does, you know, Heinrich Schliemann,'s Trojan jewelry, which went to Berlin and then in World War II has ended up almost all of it in Russia, in Moscow. The bust of Nefertiti, also in Berlin. And one of my favorite parts of going to the Metropolitan Museum of Art is not just the Chinese pavilion, but dotted around the balcony overlooking the main entrance are some marvelous examples of Chinese porcelain. My personal favorite, excuse me, is the Sang de Boeuf vase. And the reason it's my personal favorite, you will love this, Grace, is that it is featured in one of Georgette Hare, I think, her very finest novel called A Civil Contract, in which the rough and tumble, newly rich father of the bride has this unexpected passion for fine Chinese porcelain, and Sang de Boeuf is his very favorite. And it translates to bull's blood, and I never knew what that looked like in all the decades that I had read and loved that book until I saw this vase at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and was transfixed. So, you know, are you a museum junkie, Grace?
I am. I think growing up, I wasn't so much. I would often go to museums and art museums in particular and get kind of nervous because I felt like I didn't understand. I didn't have the necessary background to understand. But now I love going to museums. I think I have a better appreciation of it. And I am actually a tour guide at the Cantor Museum and the Anderson Collection. And so it's been really a joy to get to know pieces of art there a little better and also to share art with the general population and museum goers and to ease some of the pressures off of them when, you know, sometimes people come in with the expectation that you need a big background in art or in history to be able to appreciate going to a museum, when it's really, I think that if you see a piece and it evokes some sort of emotion, some sort of recognition within you, then often that can be enough.
I think it is enough. I think you can love it. I mean, you know, I have a passion for tapestries, for example. Who knows why? But what's interesting, I think, in regard to Chinese art is one of the most controversial collections of Chinese art outside of mainland China is in Taiwan, and was taken there by Chiang Kai-shek and was presumably liberated largely from the Forbidden City. I don't think it was from the Summer Palace so much as anyway, the Royal Palace in Beijing, which I have visited and is a remarkable architectural monument. But that's an ongoing dispute, isn't it, between China and Taiwan at the moment?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that it is, you know, recently the conversation of art and where it belongs and where it should go to has really been talked about a lot more than it used to be, which I think is a necessary conversation and a really interesting one for all of us to observe, because just like you mentioned earlier, there's some change in the zeitgeist.
Well, it is. I mean, it's become politicized to a great degree. And, you know, one of the arguments in favor of colonial appropriation of art was that more advanced countries could take better care of it. And I mean, I've seen instances of that at the Hermitage in St. Petersburg, and I'll give you a real choke to see the Leonardo right in front of an open window with the traffic and the dirt and everything blowing in. And so, you know, those I think are legitimate questions. One of the most controversial things is the Elgin marbles, but and here's the lawyer in me. I point out that they were not stolen. They were actually purchased for real money by Lord Elgin, who raided his wife's fortune to do it, from the legitimate government of Greece at that time. And so it really isn't looted in the same sense that we often think of other treasures that have made their way to other locations. So I'm actually think the Brits ought to keep the Elgin marbles, but I think there are other instances. This is just me, everybody has an opinion, ought to send it back. So what we're talking about in Grace's book is museums that have significant holdings of Chinese art. We're going to talk about the diaspora, but then the question arises, and it's an interesting one because this book isn't really classifiable. I mean, it isn't one where you can say, oh, look, it's this or that, because one of the questions involved in it has to do with ethics and justice. Is it okay to commit a crime in order to affect some kind of justice? And I find that fascinating, but you come from a medical background, I come from a legal background, so I think it's interesting that you waded into that. So where do all these, different aspects of this book, where do they come from?
Yeah, so I think where all of it originated was when I heard about these real life thefts, because of course, Portrait of a Thief is inspired by the true story of Chinese art being stolen from Western museums. And in real life, no one knows who's behind the thefts, but pretty consistently, all the pieces that are being stolen are pieces that were looted from the Old Summer Palace. And so there's a lot of mystery around where it's going, where this stolen art is now. But when I first learned about this, I was a recent college graduate. I was living in New York City, and I thought about it, and I've always loved heist movies, and so I thought, this is a really fun story, and I wonder what it would look like if people like me, ordinary Chinese Americans, were trying to pull off a heist like this. Because growing up, my siblings and I, we'd always play these games. We'd say, okay, like we just watched this movie, like what roles would we play in a heist? How would we pull something like this off? But ultimately, I've never committed a heist. I think I'm in medical school. I value my place here a little too much for that. But when I heard about this news, I thought, what if someone had asked me or my friends, how would we manage something? And so the rest of the story really came from there. And I wanted to talk about these ethical questions that we're just discussing about whether this looted art should be returned, whether it really counted as a crime if you were returning something that had previously been stolen. And I also wanted to make it featuring characters from the Chinese diaspora, because as a Chinese American, I spent a lot of my childhood grappling with these questions of identity and trying to figure out where I belonged. And I think there were a lot of really nice ways to examine the Chinese American identity through the lens of this looted art and how it should be returned home.
So among all these wonderful movies, are you a fan of Topkapi, which is my personal favorite museum heist movie?
I have not yet seen it.
Well, Grace, from among its other joys is Peter Ustinov, who was a marvelous actor, and he's the lead. But basically, this is a group of people who break into, or he does, breaks into Topkapi, which is the wonderful museum in Istanbul, and they're there to steal a particular treasure. And right now, Arsène Lupin has made a comeback as an art thief. On, I guess, I'm not sure, I think it's Netflix. Who can tell with so many streaming channels? But anyway, there's the Louvre involved. So there's a long and distinguished tradition of heist novels. Most of them, though, don't really raise the ethical question of whether it's a crime if you're returning something that was originally stolen. I mean, most of them are basically outright theft, and so it's just, and there's a whole tradition in crime fiction called written from the wrong end of the gun. In other words, instead of it being the police or it's written from it's like The Sting, for example, which is a great movie in which the bad guys are the leads, or at least the people up to no good. You can't necessarily call them bad guys, and generally they aren't really bad guys, or you wouldn't be all that sympathetic, right? But anyway, but there's a really long question back there. I mean, you have to ask yourself, how did some of these treasures get to the summer palace? Were they, in fact, what's the provenance of some of them? Were they, in fact, heisted by various Chinese emperors from somebody else? I mean, maybe there's a long chain of stolen art behind them.
Yeah, I think that first, I love that phrase, the wrong end of the gun, because I think a lot of the heist movies and the shows that I love, you know that the person you're rooting for is the bad guy, or but at the same time, their backstory is so compelling, their reasons for it are so compelling that you can't help but root for them. And I think that that was absolutely what I was going for as well in Portrait of a Thief, where regardless of what your stance is on the moral question of where this art belongs, the crew and their reasons behind wanting this art and what it would mean for them is ultimately just a fun adventure to follow along with and raises fun questions. And on the topic of provenance, I think I'm always really fascinated by it because often we don't get that sort of complex backstory about where a piece of art is from. And especially, I think, for art outside of the Western world, so Chinese art and art from elsewhere, when I see it discussed on museum placards and things like that, it often really only says, it's from China, and then it estimates a time period. And, I would always love to know a little more.
Well, China has a long imperial history of its own. So it may be that something from the Summer Palace actually was, taken from Mongolia or Korea or parts of China not then under Chinese rule. It's a fascinating question, and there's only so far you can go back. I mean, there's provenance requires documentation, some kind of records, and it's often missing. So we just ran into that. A relative died, and in his co-op in New York, he and my sister had collected Oriental pottery, mostly Japanese, I think, maybe some Korean, some Chinese, and Sotheby's has taken some of them and put them up for auction. 3 of them just sold, but there's a number of them because we can't find any records of how he acquired them. So there's no provenance, and therefore a reputable try it again, auction house like Sotheby's is not going to take works of art that where there is no provenance. It's a really complicated question when you get to the Nazis and war looting. And if you go to the museum, I'm trying to remember which one it is, excuse me, where the woman in gold is on display, the famous Klimt painting, which became a movie with Helen Mirren and so forth. And that one, the provenance of it was clear up to a point. And then, there's a huge question going on about World War II art that is still not back in its homes. But anyway, let's talk about your group here, because you don't have a sole actor here. I mean, we have Will Chen, but he's not alone in your conspirators. So how did you develop this cast?
Yeah, so I started off with all the very classic heist archetypes. So Will Chen is our leader, but we also have a con artist, we have a getaway driver, we have a hacker, and then we have our thief. And so I wanted to think about how these very classic heist roles would translate over when you apply them to college students who I wanted to have some sort of skill, but obviously not quite the same as any sort of expert criminal. And so our con artist turns into a public policy major, and our hacker turns into a Silicon Valley software engineer. And from there, I think I had a lot of fun building out these characters and their relationships, because to me, the story always kind of begins with the characters and how they interact with each other and the conflict that arises when they work together or try to work together.
So how are they recruited? They're a disparate group. So how are they pulled together to accomplish your heist?
Yeah, so we start off with Will, who is an art history major at Harvard, and his younger sister is at Duke, and she's a public policy major. So she is our con artist who can talk her way out of anything. Her roommate, Lily, is a mechanical engineering major and also a street racer because as a mechanical engineer, you get a lot of experience tinkering around. And also she has a background of working with cars. And so now we have three of our five main characters. And then we have Will's childhood friend, Daniel, who is over in California at UCLA, and he is a pre-med. And because he wants to be a surgeon someday, he's very detail oriented. He studies quite a lot. He has very steady hands. So all these aspects that could somewhat be applied to this idea of what a thief should be good at. And then finally, we have our last character, Alex, who is only very loosely related to the rest of them. She is a Silicon Valley software engineer who previously dropped out of MIT. She went on a couple dates with Will a very long time ago, back when they were about freshmen in college, but they've managed to stay in touch. And because of her experience working in tech, Will recruits her as the last piece of the puzzle to round out their crew.
But what has motivated Will?
A big question. I think that starting off with Will, who was the first character that I had, was a lot of fun because I wanted to find someone who was similar to me in a sense. And so Will has a lot of this ambition, a lot of fear of failure that I really felt, especially when I was in college. But also, he studies art history. He's the oldest son. He feels a lot of pressure, both placed on himself and this external pressure that his parents have never really said, but he feels to be this American dream for his family, to be this perfect Asian child, the one who's at Harvard. And at the same time, he really loves art. And he doesn't think that he has a career in art because it's not stable enough, it's not certain, he's not sure that he can be all that good at it. And so he ended up studying art history, which is a little more stable. It's the closest that he can really get to a career in art. And he's on the cusp of graduation. He doesn't yet have a job. He feels all this fear and all this pressure and this desire to be extraordinary. And so when this mysterious Chinese benefactor contacts him and invites him to assemble this heist crew and to steal back looted Chinese art for a $50 million payout, it's really pretty easy for him to take it.
Well, it's a high risk thing for him because if he's really going to have a career in art, he's going to wind up in a museum or a gallery, chances are. So it's not going to look good on his resume if he's convicted of robbing museums. So, they all have, they're all high achievers. They all have career plans. They all have a lot at risk. They also don't look like the normal thief. These are not street scum. And so you have to wonder in part if, there's a certain cloaking of if they're caught, how easy will it be to prosecute them if, because they are really good and contributing citizens, they're not, being paid by the mafia or something. And then there's a nationalism component here, right? That they're all motivated by having Chinese art returned to China, or that's what they think is happening. Because you did raise the point earlier, which I think is a good one. In the real heist of Chinese art, we don't know if it's sitting on some oligarch's yacht. We don't know if it's in a vault somewhere in Japan or Saudi Arabia. I mean, it's not entirely clear. Often these kinds of things are motivated by collectors, who are greedy or just want to have something nobody else has, and are perfectly willing to pay a fortune for it and then lock it away. So only they get to enjoy it. And then there's also the question, which I think is an interesting one. I can't remember who it is, but I think it was a Saudi who bought a very valuable piece of art for an extraordinary amount of money at auction not too long ago. And now it's riding around on his yacht, which is now not optimal conditions for preserving, a masterpiece. I mean, boats need constant maintenance from salt air and the whole bit. So, really, we have a great masterpiece and it's out there at sea somewhere floating around. So, there's just so many questions here. So next question, how did you decide which museums you were going to hit?
So this was a combination of the real life museums that these real life thieves hit, and the museums that I was particularly interested in and were closest to my heart. So, for example, the Chateau de Fontainebleau was actually robbed by these real life thieves. And on the other hand, the Met, which the characters also, intend to rob, is solely my own construction because I used to live in New York City. And I think that the Met, for me and for many people, is a representation of some of the greatest museums and the art that you can really find in the Western world. And so I wanted my characters to spend some time over there.
Well, you had a great time with the Met, and unfortunately, since we can't go to the end of this book without risking spoilers, I will say that I think Grace engineers a particularly brilliant scenario at the Met. I wondered how she was going to bring it off, and so I was delighted to see the way it worked out because, I've been to museums all over the world. My husband's great grandfather founded the Museum of Science and Industry in Chicago based on the Deutsches Museum. It's not an art museum, and it's no longer called the Julius Rosenwald Museum, which it was when I was a child. It's now called the Museum of Science and Industry. And then my sister, who did major in art history, was not only the chief curator of film at the Museum of Modern Art, but the associate director until she died. Before she died, because she was ill for quite a long time. So we have a whole family history of museums, and my husband and I, when we travel, that's what we do. We, spend a lot. We're going to Tahiti at the end of April, and he's already lined us up to go to the Gauguin Museum. And, we've done it all over the world. And not just art. Sometimes it's houses. Sometimes, Fontainebleau, for example, where we spent a couple of days. Although I actually like Vaux-le-Vicomte better in a lot of respects. Fontainebleau is where Da Vinci ended up because he went to work for Francis the First and he died there. So you not only get great art, but you get great architecture and a lot of history as well when you do all that. But I wondered if you similarly have that particular interest.
Yes, I absolutely do. I was also at the Fontainebleau a little bit earlier this year, and it was so beautiful. It was so much fun to see it, and also to do some comparison between what I'd written in my book, which I finished writing during the pandemic, so I hadn't had the chance to really go anywhere, and then being able to do that, have a new frame of reference, so I could make some tweaks, make sure that everything and their theft as well lined up in accordance to the way the palace was structured. And so whenever I travel, and I'm hopeful that I can do a little bit more as things are easing up now, I love to go to museums. And I of course have a soft spot for art museums, but really anywhere. I think it's a beautiful way to get a sense of the feeling of a place, the background of it. And I hope that some of my love of museums made it into the book, even though they're stealing art from these places. But I still love them. I think that museums can do better often when it comes to looted art. But when you love a thing like museums, you're always hoping that it has room for improvement.
Well, I think also, as we keep evolving social issues, things that were once acceptable or even laudable, now are not necessarily. And that's the history of the world. It keeps turning. So if we look at museums as a repository, however it gets there, of, great art, some of the finest achievements. And it doesn't even, the Morgan Library in New York, for example, which you probably have visited, Grace, is, it's a combination of wonderful books, but also there's some extraordinary art at the Morgan, and they do wonderful exhibitions. I remember going to a Mozart manuscript exhibition at the Morgan, and it, I knew, because any of us who saw Amadeus knew something about Mozart. He's a composer I followed, but until I actually saw the manuscripts and saw that they were single draft manuscripts. Mozart, the music we have, he just wrote it. Almost all musical manuscripts are amended. They have changes, what edits like you do in a book, not Mozart. It's just, there it is. And until you see it, it doesn't have the same impact. And I think seeing art as opposed to photographs of it or whatever it is has a really visceral impact on you, whether you know anything about it or not. You don't need to, as you pointed out. So did your 5 characters grow any appreciation for what they were stealing? Because they didn't necessarily, like the mechanical engineer or the Silicon Valley, they didn't necessarily value art, did they, before this started?
So I wanted, in writing these 5 characters, to give them all different relationships to the art that they were stealing and also to China. And so I think that they did all develop some level of appreciation. But of course, we vary from Will, who loves art history, to people like our getaway driver and our hacker, who grow to appreciate the art for a couple different reasons. But ultimately, they all have different reasons for embarking upon the heist, and so they all go through an arc of growth. And as someone who loves art, I wanted all of them to have some appreciation for art by the end.
So one of the real pleasures of this book is not just visiting museums and so forth, but part of it is watching this crew be assembled and then wondering if they're going to get away with their heist, and then wondering what the afterburner of all that will be. And I must say, when I read it, I kept thinking, how is Grace going to bring this off? And unfortunately, as I mentioned, we can't discuss that. But it's a real joy to see the skill with which she has done that. And do you think, Grace, that having written 2 books previous gave you more confidence and maybe a skill set to write this 3rd book?
Yes, absolutely. I think it made a huge difference. Writing the first draft of this book took me about 2 years. Um, and a lot of it was because I had it all kind of plotted out from the beginning, and I needed to figure out, I think, with a heist story in particular, there are so many moving parts that you have to kind of be writing with the ending in mind. Otherwise, you show up to the last, 20, 30 pages, and you have no idea what's going to happen or how the story will wrap up. And so it was definitely a challenge. But I think having the experience of writing books in the past and the ways that they taught me to plot and to focus on pacing and bringing all the different puzzle pieces together was really incredibly helpful, because when I started writing this book, it was definitely at a level above what I was capable of achieving. But at the same time, I knew that I desperately wanted to read the story and it wasn't out yet. And so, unless someone had a book out there that I hadn't yet read, I had to write it for myself. So I had to figure out how to do it. And it took, a little bit of time, but it ultimately, I'm very happy with the way it turned out.
The literary world has been delighted with it, and you'll see more of that next week when it actually publishes. But how has it been received among Chinese Americans that you know? How have they reacted to it, or is it too soon? Excuse me, is it too soon to tell because the book isn't really available?
So I've had some early reviews come in from other Chinese Americans and others of, the Chinese diaspora or the Asian diaspora, and I think those have really been extraordinarily meaningful to me, because writing this book, it was all for me. And so seeing other people connect with the aspects of the characters and their struggles with identity and culture and diaspora and belonging, it it's been very rewarding. And I think that this book and many of the other books coming out right now about Asian American identity are ones that I never really got to experience when I was younger, when I was in high school or college or my early 20s. And so being able to be part of this rise in Asian American literature has been so rewarding. I shared this book with my family, and getting their reactions was just so much fun. So my sister was a very early reader, but my brother read it recently and did all the fact checking for my Harvard references. And my parents read it a couple weeks or months ago. And my mom recently started a reread, and she told me that when she's reading it, she keeps discovering new things about me as she goes through. And so that's been really, really lovely.
That is wonderful. I'm going to send an autographed copy to my friend Lisa C., who is one of the, I don't want to call her pioneers, but excuse me, I keep losing my voice, has written many books about Chinese Americans and Chinese in China and so forth. I'm extremely fond of her. And her first book, a nonfiction book called On Gold Mountain, about her grandfather, I think it's her grandfather, not a great grandfather, who is a Chinese immigrant to America, has been turned into an opera and is in fact being produced in Los Angeles, or it's on stage, I think, in Los Angeles. But Lisa wrote an international bestseller called Snowflower and the Secret Fan, which was set in China, but she's also brought the China girls to America. Her most recent book is actually set in Korea, but has various connections to World War II and so forth. But anyway, you know, I'm delighted that Lisa will have good company with you. Tonight, we're actually talking to, I'm trying to, Pong Shepherd, I had a blank there on her last name, about the cartographers. And while it's not a Chinese diaspora novel at all, it is a heist novel in a way, and takes place in the New York Public Library. So I love heist novels, so I'm really excited to see. I think it's been a neglected genre that's coming back. So Grace, let me ask you, it's very rare that a publisher offers a single book contract anymore. So I'm going to guess that you've signed up for at least 2 books. What is it that you're working on as a follow-up? And you know, the pressure to do a second novel after a very successful first novel is pretty intense.
So I am working on a second book right now. I can confirm that the pressures of a second book are a little daunting. So I'm working on it very slowly, but it is tentatively set at Stanford Med, about rival graduate students. And the specific details about that are still up in the air as I'm trying to plot it out and fall in love with the story, but also figure out how to write it. But I'm very excited about it, and I'm hoping for some cameos from some of our favorite characters in Portrait of a Thief.
Oh, that'll be wonderful. Well, a book set at Stanford. I love it. Yeah, you may not know this, but in May, I'm looking across at my bookshelf. There is an actual novel coming out called The Murder of Jane Stanford. And it is, I mean, you have not been to Stanford under the grip of Jane Stanford and what we refer to as Mrs. Stanford's will. When I was there in 1958, it still controlled things. It meant that women lived in separate dormitories. It meant that we were not allowed to wear anything but skirts or dresses on campus. We were not allowed to smoke. We had a 10 o'clock curfew. We didn't get to pick our roommates. There were no sororities, but there were fraternities, which leveraged the power towards the guys in a completely different way. And that will was not, or Stanford was not able to break away from a lot of that, really until it started its overseas campus program. And they could not maintain those restrictions in Florence or in Toulouse or Stuttgart, which was the first of the overseas campus. And I was just my sister was fortunate and was able to go to Florence, and it changed the whole course of her life because the art in Florence is what inspired her to go to Columbia and you know, become a museum person in an art major. I was ahead of her, and so I didn't participate in the overseas campus program. Later in life, I made up for it by going to Oxford because I was so pissed off that I never got to do that. But Mrs. Stanford's will was a really major thing until all of that happened. So I'm looking forward to reading the book. Needless to say, I've been sent copies of it to review on various grounds. And I'm really looking forward to it because she did die in somewhat odd circumstances. I think it's in Hawaii. Didn't she die? I think she died somewhere else. I may not remember this correctly because I haven't yet read the book, but I sort of have a feeling she was not in Palo Alto. Anyway, so a Stanford book would be really fun. So is there anything you'd like to say to your fans or potential audience, since we're not quite there yet?
Oh my gosh. I think it's still really, really hard for me to believe that my book is coming out, that it's no longer this book that I wrote for myself and that I get the privilege and the joy of sharing with other people. So I want to say thank you, Barbara, for reading this book, for all your kind words, for having me today. And the same. Thank you to everyone who has tuned in for this. This has really just been so, so wonderful.
Well, we have truly enjoyed it. I'm delighted to say that Grace signed a lot of books for us, which if they haven't arrived at the store, will in the next few days. Now, technically, we can't sell outside our first mystery club. We can't sell them till Tuesday next week. But I really urge you to grab one because oftentimes first printings of books, and we won't go into book collecting away. Books are valuable, but let me tell you that first printings of books are the ones that you really want to buy if you're going to do book collecting. It all relates to Mr. Gutenberg and metal type and the fact that it degraded every single time an impression was made. Today it's irrelevant, and it just means either you were smart enough to like a book when it first came out, or you were willing later to pay an extraordinary amount of money to own it. But anyway, we will have some extra copies of Portrait of a Thief that Grace has kindly autographed for us. So I really urge you to buy one. It's always a good idea to buy in at the very beginning of an author's career, and then you can be smug forever about how you knew. You just knew, right, that they were going to be a star. But I think you will be, Grace. And I guess I failed to ask you one question. Are you going to continue with your medical career while you're also writing books? Because that's a really demanding career of its own.
It is. That's the plan. I enter my clerkships, which are my full-time hospital rotations, this June. And so I have a small book tour scheduled, and then I'm hoping to get some good writing done. And then I'll be spending most of my hours in the hospital, but the hours outside of that, I plan on writing and trying to figure out a sustainable balance for the two.
What a lucky thing you're young, because I understand that the primary characteristic of people who are entering into this phase of her medical career is sleep deprivation, which is only equal when you have your first baby. So I certainly wish you luck. And we'll stay in touch. I will send off a book to Lisa. And after I read The Murder of Jane Stanford, I'll send you a copy, because I think it sounds like something you enjoy reading, and I certainly will too. Thank you, Grace, for your time. We really appreciate it. Thanks for joining us, everybody. Bye.
Bye.